long-time listener, first-time caller, and just like most of you, I have had more of my fair share of paranormal experiences. I'm going to start with my earliest memory of a ghost encounter. I grew up in a house where two boys died in, one of which died in my bathtub. The story goes that the little boy and his sister were taking a bath together. His sister finished first, so the babysitter took the little girl out and started to blow dry her hair. The phone rang, and the babysitter went to leave the room to answer it, but forgot to put the dryer down. The dryer was yanked back and fell into the tub while it was still plugged in, electrocuting the little boy. Coincidentally, one of my elementary school teachers remembers this death and said that it happened sometime in the 70s. I don't know if my family was aware of the death before accepting the rental. The second boy died while I was living in the house. He was my downstairs neighbour and could have possibly been murdered by his mother. I don't know what came of it, but the family moved out a few weeks later. My home had been quiet, nothing strange happened. A month or so passed since the death of that boy. Then they appeared. It was subtle at first, a few misplaced belongings, little cold spots here and there, and footsteps. They weren't frequent enough to raise a flag, not yet at least. They started to get more creative and interactive. My sister and I had tea sets that we were obsessed with. We would use them on the daily, so we got into the habit of, rather than putting them back in their plastic container, we would just push them to the corner of the living room, out of everyone's way. Cut to angry Nana yelling at us early in the morning for leaving the living room a mess. My sister and I were obviously confused because we knew we pushed everything aside. This happened a few times, so my Nana was now threatening us by saying she was going to throw the sets away. So, one night, my Nana gets up to go to the bathroom and hears clinking and clanking coming from the living room. She runs in and turns the light on in hopes of catching us red-handed. Nope, the room was empty. The tea set strewn throughout the living room. Mind you, she had watched as my sisters and I pushed them to the corner earlier that evening. Ironically, they never touched our tea sets after that night. It still didn't stop them from messing with us in other ways. Fast forward to when I was in 8th grade. I remember that I'd just gotten home from school and plopped myself on the bed. A few seconds later, someone sat themselves right next to me. My cat runs in and starts to stare at whatever had joined me on the bed, and then it started to hiss. There was that time I was walking through the living room to get to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I didn't bother with the lights because enough light was coming in through the windows. On my way back, there was this little shadow that was jumping from one couch to the other. I figured it was my cat being silly. I continued towards my bedroom to find that my cat had been waiting for me on my bed. Then there were the two shadows. We lived in a one-bedroom, so my Nana decided to make the dining room into a bedroom for my sis, her, and I to share. She had used a pretty curtain to divide the dining area from the living room. My mum is a Santera, so she had a shrine set up with candles and sades, etc. The light from the candle would reach the dining area. My bed was facing the curtains. That one night, I woke up to see two shadows casted onto the curtains. At first I thought it was my mother's statues. The curtains had little holes in shapes of floral designs, so I could see that nothing was in between the light source and the curtains. The one shadow was taller than the other, by almost about 3 foot. Immediately, I thought of the dead boys. I was a bit scared but ended up falling back asleep. The next morning, I woke up with 2 bruises. My family's originally from Ecuador, so as many Latinx know, we sure do love our superstitions. My Nana saw them and said that I'd been pinched by the devil. I believed it was the boys that were being mischievous. My sister had her fair share of experiences too. The one that sticks out in my mind is when she saw a full-blown apparition. She'd gotten up to go to the bathroom during the night. She turned on the light in the hallway leading to the bathroom. The door was open, so she could see right into it. She said that there was a little boy sitting on the toilet. He was looking right at her and had blue lips. She ran back to bed and didn't tell anyone until we were adults. There were a handful of other little happenings, but nothing worth mentioning. We ended up getting evicted from there when I was 14, but that didn't mean that the ghostly fun was over. That'll have to wait for another night though, soon, and I hope you enjoyed my little ghost encounter. So I've always had an attraction to the paranormal or anything supernatural, even as a young child. My babysitters made me watch A Nightmare on Elm Street when I was 5, and it just went from there. I've never been easily frightened. In fact, I'd say I've been frightened twice in my whole life. Once was when I thought my house had been broken into, and the other time happened when I moved to a house in Manchester at the age of 7. The house was big and creepy to look at, I guess, but my family never really thought so. My bedroom was tiny, and it was all the way at the back of the house. My parents put me in there because I was a sleepwalker, and being at the back of the house, they'd hear me walking around before I got too far. The other thing about being there was it was dead silent at night, because it was so far away from everyone else's room. My room had this big, thick framed window. They were old, but very well made, and they also completely nullified outside noise. It was like being in a vacuum once my door was closed. My first night in that room left me feeling uncomfortable. I always felt like I wasn't alone in the room whenever I was trying to go to sleep. It unsettled me, but I never mentioned it or complained to my family. I'd been living there for about half a year, with the same feeling more or less every night, and then one night, I woke up, for absolutely no reason. This was unusual because I am a deep sleeper, and rarely happens to me, but I just felt like I shouldn't be asleep, like there was a voice telling me to wake up. I sat up, and my room was silent as usual and completely dark. It was always really dark on the floor space between my bunk bed and curtains, completely drowned out light. When I sat up, I looked over the side of the top bunk. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel something. I lay back down and tried to clear the feeling I was being watched out of my mind. I turned my head and looked out of my window and drew the curtains back and immediately got the feeling I was being watched again, but closer. Like someone had climbed half on the steps of my bed and stopped to look at me. I quickly glanced around but again couldn't see anything, even with the moonlight and streetlights coming through the window. For the third time, I felt I was being watched, and I turned to the window again. An old man, probably in his 60s, was stood on our garage roof. I immediately shut my eyes. Our garage connected to our house to a little cooler room, and the roof of the room was below my window. I told myself I was imagining things and opened them again. He was still there, but closer now. I couldn't see his face clearly. He had deep-set eyes that were brown, balding silver hair and greying stubble. He had a hooked nose and thin lips. The most bizarre part were his teeth. They were perfect, straight and white, but the moonlight hit them and it just made them look menacing. His attire looked old. It looked like a costume from Oliver Twist. He was dirty, covered in dry dirt or soot. I could only keep my eyes on him for a second or two before I closed them again, and when I opened them, his face was pressed up right against my window. I either passed out or fell back to sleep and didn't wake up again until morning. When I woke up, I was on the bottom bunk. I never slept on the bottom bunk, and I didn't even have a mattress or sheets on there. I didn't immediately remember the events of the night before and just assumed I'd been sleepwalking and stopped there. I went through my normal morning routine and got ready for school. My mum dropped me off, and I went into the shop near my school to get some sweets. As I walked in the shop, all the events of the night before hit me. I remembered all of it, and it immediately shook me to my core. I was that frightened I told my teacher, who called my mum and she picked me up and brought me home. My mum reassured me that it was just a dream. I knew it wasn't. It was weeks until I'd even stepped foot in my room again, even longer until I'd sleep in there. Eventually, I did start to sleep in there again, and I never saw the old man again.